The sound hit the hull like a sledgehammer made of pure noise. Deep inside the Iranian Kilo-class submarine, the crew didn't just hear the active sonar, they felt it in their bones. This wasn't a warning, it was a demonstration of absolute dominance. The U.S. Navy had just tracked a silent predator through the world's most dangerous choke point, and now they were letting the Iranian commander know his secret mission was over before it even began. One single deafening pulse of sound had just changed the entire calculation of power in the Strait of Hormuz, ending a high-stakes game of cat and mouse that almost nobody knew was happening. Beneath the turquoise waves of the Persian Gulf, a silent war is being fought every single day that you will never see on the evening news. It starts in the Strait of Hormuz, a sliver of ocean just 33 kilometers wide that acts as the jugular vein of the global economy. This tiny passage is the only way out for 20% of the world's oil supply. If this one gate closes, the lights go out in cities thousands of miles away, and global markets go into a tailspin that could last for years. Iran knows this better than anyone, and they've spent decades perfecting a way to hold that gate hostage using one specific terrifying tool, the submarine. Most people think of Iranian naval power as swarms of fast boats, but the real threat is far more sophisticated. Their submarine fleet isn't designed to fight the US Navy in the middle of the Atlantic. It's optimized for the shallow, cluttered, and incredibly noisy environment of the Gulf. This is where the Iranian Kilo-class boats thrive. These diesel-electric vessels were bought from Russia with one purpose in mind: to disappear. When they run on battery power alone, they are effectively silent, often harder to detect than massive nuclear-powered ships. In the narrow confines of the strait, a single Kilo-class sub is a nightmare for any surface fleet to manage. The strategy is ruthlessly logical. Iran doesn't need to sink the entire US Fifth Fleet to win a confrontation. They just need to make the cost of staying in the Gulf high enough that it's no longer worth the risk. By positioning a submarine and a firing solution near a carrier strike group, they send a message that the most expensive assets in the American arsenal are vulnerable. This isn't propaganda or bluster. It's a funded, operationally developed doctrine designed to leverage geography against technology. On this particular morning, one Iranian commander decided to put that doctrine to the ultimate test by slipping his boat into the most contested water on Earth. As the Iranian sub left its home port and went dark, it entered a landscape that is an acoustic nightmare for sonar operators. The Persian Gulf is shallow, which causes sound to bounce unpredictably off the seabed. The water is exceptionally warm, creating thermal layers that act like acoustic mirrors, bending and trapping sonar signals. To make matters worse, the strait is packed with commercial tankers and fishing boats, all generating a wall of white noise that a clever submarine commander can use as a cloak. In these conditions, finding a diesel-electric sub is like trying to hear a specific person whispering in the middle of a crowded, echoing stadium. But the US Navy has spent billions of dollars and decades of research preparing for exactly this scenario. Their answer to the Iranian challenge is a layered, redundant net of sensors that starts high above the water. On this day, a P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft was already circling the strait. This isn't just a plane, it's a flying supercomputer designed specifically for one job: hunting submarines. As the P-8 banked over the shipping lanes, it began dropping sonobuoys into the water. These small cylindrical devices are the front line of the defense, acting as a grid of ears that transmit everything they hear back to the aircraft's sensors for analysis. The acoustic data flowing into the P-8 is processed by algorithms so advanced they can distinguish between the tail flip of a whale and the mechanical hum of a specific propeller. When the Iranian sub moved into position, it left a tiny acoustic fingerprint, a snort cycle, or a specific machinery vibration that the US database recognized instantly. The call went out across the strike group: possible submarine contact. The game was on. This wasn't a drill. An Iranian Kilo-class boat was threading its way through the strait at periscope depth, attempting to gather intelligence and establish a lethal firing position against a transiting US aircraft carrier. The intervention began with surgical precision. A US Navy destroyer escorting the carrier was immediately redirected to block the submarine's path. This ship is equipped with a towed array sonar. A long cable of sensitive hydrophones streamed thousands of feet behind the vessel to get away from its own engine noise. At the same time, a Virginia-class nuclear attack submarine operating in deeper waters to the south began a slow, deliberate move toward the contact. The Americans were closing the net from the air, the surface, and the depths. The Iranian crew, if they were as well trained as intelligence suggested, knew the environment was suddenly getting very crowded. There is a specific sound that haunts every submariner, the splash of a sonobuoy hitting the water. Each one makes a distinctive transient noise, followed by the mechanical whine of the hydrophone array deploying. When you're in a submarine and you hear those splashes encircling you, you know the hunters have found your scent. The Iranian commander now faced a series of impossible choices. If he went fast to escape, he would create more noise and give away his exact location. If he went deep, he'd risk hitting the bottom of the shallow gulf. His only real hope was to hug the seabed and pray the thermal layers would hide his signature one last time. But the pressure was about to get much worse. In a move of calculated risk, the Iranian sub raised its periscope mast for just a few seconds to verify the position of the US carrier. It was a fatal mistake. The moment that mast broke the surface, it was painted by the destroyer's high-resolution radar and spotted by the P-8 sensors. Even worse, the sub's own electronic intelligence suite likely emitted a brief signal as it tried to scan the American ships. In the world of modern naval warfare, even a second of exposure is long enough for a computer to triangulate your position with terrifying accuracy. The Iranian boat was no longer a ghost, it was a target. At this point, the rules of engagement dictated the next move. The Iranian sub hadn't fired a weapon, so the US Navy couldn't launch a torpedo. However, allowing a hostile submarine to maintain a firing position on a carrier was unacceptable. The response had to be calibrated, aggressive enough to force a retreat, but controlled enough to avoid starting a full-scale war. This is where the intervention turned from a surveillance mission into a physical confrontation. The US destroyer accelerated, heading directly for the submarine's last known coordinates. They weren't going to drop depth charges, they were going to use something much more psychological. The destroyer activated its powerful hull-mounted sonar in a high-intensity mode. In naval slang, this is called pinging, but that word doesn't do justice to the reality of the situation. At close range, military active sonar is an acoustic weapon. The sound waves are so powerful they can cause physical pain to people inside a submarine hull. It's a terrifying experience that strips away any illusion of stealth. By pinging the Iranian boat, the US Navy was sending a crystal clear message in the only language that matters beneath the waves. We see you, we have a lock on you, and we are choosing not to destroy you today. Inside the Iranian kilo, the situation must have been chaotic. Every time the sonar pulse hit the hull, it would have rung like a giant bell, making it impossible for the crew to communicate or operate their own sensors. The message was received loud and clear. The Iranian commander immediately aborted his mission and began a frantic withdrawal. He turned his boat away from the carrier strike group and headed back toward the safety of Iranian territorial waters. The predator had become the prey, and the tactical advantage he thought he had in the shallow waters of the strait had been completely dismantled by superior American sensor integration. The US assets didn't stop there. They continued to shadow the submarine all the way back to its home waters, ensuring it didn't try to loop back or reposition. The P-8 stayed overhead, tracking the acoustic signature until the boat was practically at the pier. This was a masterclass in modern deterrence. By maintaining a continuous track, the Navy proved that Iran's stealth submarines weren't nearly as invisible as Tehran claimed. It was a humiliating outcome for a mission that was likely intended to demonstrate Iranian strength. Instead, it only served to highlight the massive technological gap that still exists in the Gulf. What makes this incident so significant isn't just the tactical win, it's the fact that this happens all the time. The public rarely hears about these encounters because both sides have reasons to keep them quiet. For the US, revealing too much could compromise secret tracking capabilities. For Iran, admitting their best submarines are being toyed with by American destroyers isn't good for morale or international standing. This silent war is a constant cycle of probe and response, a high-stakes chess match where the pieces are billion-dollar machines and the board is one of the most volatile regions on the planet. However, it would be a mistake to think the US Navy can afford to be complacent. Iran is a fast learner. Every time one of their submarines is tracked and pinged, they gather data on American tactics and sonar frequencies. They are actively working on domestic designs like the Fateh class, which are reportedly capable of launching cruise missiles from underwater. These new boats represent a significant jump in capability, shifting the threat from simple harassment to a genuine danger for surface warships. The Iranians are studying the gaps in the net, looking for the one day when the P-8 isn't overhead or the thermal layers are just right. The geography of the Strait of Hormuz will always favor the defender. As long as Iran can deploy mines, fast boats, and submarines in these shallow waters, they remain a Tier 1 threat to global energy security. The US Navy's presence in the region isn't just about showing the flag. It's about the constant, grueling work of anti-submarine warfare. It requires a level of technical expertise and coordination that few other navies can match. On this day, the system worked perfectly, but the margin for error in the strait is razor thin. One mistake by a sonar operator could be the difference between a successful escort and a global catastrophe. There's also the psychological aspect of this naval intervention. For an Iranian submarine crew, knowing that an American destroyer can find you in the acoustic clutter of the Gulf is a massive deterrent. Submarine warfare relies entirely on the arrogance of invisibility. Once you know you're being watched, your entire mission changes from offensive to survival. The US Navy uses these encounters to reinforce that feeling of vulnerability. They want every Iranian commander to wonder, the next time they leave port, if there's already a P-8 or a Virginia-class sub waiting for them in the darkness, just out of sight. This specific intervention also sent a message to America's allies in the region. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE rely on the US Navy to keep the oil flowing. If Iran were allowed to harass shipping or threaten carriers with impunity, those regional partnerships would quickly crumble. By hitting back hard against the submarine challenge, the US demonstrated that it is still the ultimate guarantor of maritime security in the Middle East. It's a role that cost billions to maintain, but as this incident proves, the alternative, a closed strait and a global economic collapse, is far more expensive. The technology involved in these shadow wars is evolving at a breakneck pace. We're moving into an era of unmanned underwater vehicles and AI-driven sonar analysis that will make it even harder for traditional diesel-electric subs to hide. But for now, the human element remains the most critical factor. The sonar operators on that destroyer and the pilots in that P-8 are the ones who have to make split-second decisions that could prevent or start a war. Their ability to distinguish a threat from the noise of the Gulf is what keeps the world's most important shipping lane open for business. As the Iranian submarine finally reached the safety of its port, the US carrier strike group continued its transit through the strait as if nothing had happened. There were no news reports, no angry diplomatic cables, and no official change in the regional threat level. But beneath the surface, a major challenge had been issued and a powerful response had been delivered. The Iranian Navy learned that their silent move wasn't nearly as quiet as they hoped, and the US Navy proved once again that they own the sensors, the signals, and the ultimate outcome of any engagement in the Gulf. The next time you pump gas or hear about oil prices, remember the story of this Iranian submarine. Remember that somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz, there are forces in the dark measuring each other every hour of every day. This is what modern deterrence looks like. It's not always about explosions and headlines. Sometimes it's just about a single bone-shaking ping in the deep that tells the enemy the cost of their next move is simply too high to pay. The peace of the world's oceans is often maintained by these invisible victories that the public will never see, but the participants will never forget. The Strait of Hormuz remains a powder keg, but for now, the lid is on. The US Navy's intervention after the Kilo-class challenge showed that while Iran can make a move, they can't yet make it stick. As long as the Americans maintain their technological and operational edge, the world's most important choke point will remain open. But the ocean is deep and the Iranians are patient. The silent war beneath the waves is far from over, and the next challenge could be just one dive away. Stay vigilant, because in the Strait of Hormuz, the most dangerous threats are the ones you can't see until it's too late. The sound hit the hull like a sledgehammer made of pure noise. Deep inside the Iranian Kilo-class submarine, the crew didn't just hear the active sonar, they felt it in their bones. This wasn't a warning, it was a demonstration of absolute dominance. The US Navy had just tracked a silent predator through the world's most dangerous choke point, and now they were letting the Iranian commander know his secret mission was over before it even began. One single deafening pulse of sound had just changed the entire calculation of power in the Strait of Hormuz, ending a high-stakes game of cat and mouse that almost nobody knew was happening. Beneath the turquoise waves of the Persian Gulf, a silent war is being fought every single day that you will never see on the evening news. It starts in the Strait of Hormuz, a sliver of ocean just 33 kilometers wide that acts as the jugular vein of the global economy. This tiny passage is the only way out for 20% of the world's oil supply. If this one gate closes, the lights go out in cities thousands of miles away, and global markets go into a tailspin